Hey guys, tonight we begin with the unfortunate yet oddly fascinating tale of what it was really like to be a chamber pot emptier in the royal courts. Yes, that was a job, a real one, with real pots and very real smells. You probably won't survive this, not just because of the physical labor or the shame, but because of the sheer, unrelenting ick of it all. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You awaken beneath silk drapes. Not yours, of course, but ones hanging in a chamber you're not supposed to linger in. It's the Duchess's quarters, and she's gone for her morning prayers, which means you have precisely 4 minutes to grab the pot under her gilded velvet chair, tiptoe out without stepping on her perfumed slippers, and pray to St. Dunstan that today isn't another overflow day. The first inhale is always the hardest, not because you aren't used to it, but because the smell somehow finds a new way to surprise you every time. A blend of wine, regret, possibly goat cheese, and the haunting echo of last night's venison pie. You grip the earthenware pot carefully, it's warm, and slide it onto your wooden carrier. It sloshes. You flinch. You didn't ask for this life. Nobody does. You were born into it, the son of a kitchen scullion who dropped dead mid-ladle, and the only opening available when you turned 12 was, well, this. Officially, your job title is Groom of the Stool's Apprentice's Assistant. Unofficially, you're the one who carries the poo. It's not printed on your tunic, but everyone knows. Outside the chamber, the corridor is cold and too bright. Torches flicker like they're gagging at your approach. You hear footsteps, silken, fast, noble. Someone's coming. You duck behind a tapestry depicting St. George heroically stabbing a dragon, which feels a bit too on the nose. You clutch the chamber pot like a sacred relic and hold your breath. The noblewoman passes, not noticing the faint squelch echoing behind the embroidered linen. Historians still argue whether chamber pot emptiers were technically considered servants of the bedchamber or simply vessels of misfortune. Some argue the role carried a strange intimacy. After all, you knew a person in the most bodily way. Others insist it was one step above sewer rats on the palace totem pole. You make your way down the servant stairwell, which is steep, narrow, and designed by someone who clearly hated feet. You have to hold the pot at an angle, lest it jostle. You've learned the hard way that spillage here can mean two things: a stain that no amount of scrubbing removes, and several days of people referring to you as Sir Slosh a Lot. The first pot is always the easiest. It's the hope that kills you. By the third, your arms begin to ache. By the fifth, you're developing what modern folks would call a deep existential crisis. But there's no time to reflect on life's trajectory when there are 35 more pots waiting, each tucked under a different bed, vanity, or heaven help you, ornate chamber commode with lion's feet. The stench, you'd think, would stop bothering you. It doesn't. It's a living thing, a sentient fog that follows you like an ex who won't stop messaging. It gets in your clothes, your pores, your dreams. Sometimes, even when you're off duty, you smell it. You've developed a twitch in your left eye that flutters whenever someone uncorks wine. Now, you reach the prince's chamber. He's still asleep, snoring like a warthog. You creep in. The pot? Not under the bed, not under the vanity. You sigh, lift the heavy brocade curtain, and there it is, wedged awkwardly behind a harp, of course, because His Highness had a spontaneous need while composing sonnets at 3 a.m. again. You tiptoe closer, nudge the pot. It's full, very full. In fact, physics seems to be defying your hope that it won't spill on the carpet embroidered with the family crest. You mutter a prayer to Saint Olaf, grip the edges, and lift. You do not breathe. One mainstream fact that may surprise modern listeners: nobles did not, in fact, use outhouses like the peasants. Chamber pots were status symbols. The fancier the pot, the fancier the owner. Some were silver, others porcelain. One rumor tells of a duchess whose pot had her family motto engraved on it. It translated to "In cleanliness, honor," which, debatable. Your next stop is the Queen Mother's room, and there is no hurrying here. She insists on a specific knock, then silence, then a polite wait of exactly 13 seconds. You do this every morning without fail. On the 11th second, you hear her call out, "Come not one step in further than the blue tile." You obey. You collect the pot. You back out. You bow. All with your arms full of exactly what no one wants to acknowledge. And on you go, room by room, life by sloshy life. By the time you reach the last chamber, your shoulders are screaming, your back is curved like a question mark, and your patience is thinner than the court jester's trousers. But still, you carry on, because someone has to do it. And if it's not you, it might be that smug kid from the scullery who's been eyeing your job ever since he spilled eel pie on the high steward and got demoted. You arrive at the dung heap behind the castle, the final destination. It's less a heap and more a wide steaming pit, a bubbling lake of discarded dignity. You hold your breath. You tilt the pots. You dump. You try not to look. You fail. It looks back. One down. 39 to go tomorrow. Your job, in 4 exquisitely unfortunate words: chamber pot emptier for royalty. You thought it might sound noble, maybe even useful. Instead, it sounds exactly like what it is. You carry around rich people's biological regrets in handcrafted bowls. And to be clear, these aren't your everyday peasant pots. Oh no, these are bespoke porcelain nightmares, gilded in gold leaf and occasionally bearing the family crest, as if that makes the contents any less horrifying. Some are wide-mouthed and generous, others precariously narrow, designed by someone who clearly never used one. Each noble had their own favorite model, their own rituals, and of course, their own unreasonable expectations. The king, for instance, insists that his pot never be more than halfway full. This would be fine if he didn't produce twice that volume during a typical night of overindulgence and medieval cheese. The Queen Mother, meanwhile, expects hers to be emptied with quiet dignity, whatever that means, when you're dragging it down 3 flights of stairs past 2 snoring guards and a taxidermied boar. You didn't get training for this. No handbook, no helpful tips from your predecessor, who developed a mysterious cough and vanished into the countryside. All you got was the pot carrier, a wooden yoke strapped across your shoulders, with notches for 2 pails, and a sentence: keep your head down and don't spill on the tapestries. Simple advice, deeply unhelpful. Today's pots are heavier than usual. Feast night. You can always tell by the texture. Yes, texture. You've become an unwilling expert. You can identify the meal based on smell, color, viscosity, a skill no one asks for, and even fewer want to hear about over lunch. Mainstream fact: in most medieval royal households, the groom of the stool was a real title, sometimes even a respected one. That guy handled the monarch's most intimate moments, including wiping. You, unfortunately, are not the groom of the stool. You're two ranks below. You're the one who takes the used pots away. And while you're technically not supposed to look inside, well, gravity doesn't give you that option. You've learned to tilt just so, angle the pot away, hold your breath, and pretend the warm, sloshing sound is just really thick soup. It never works. The hallway air is stale today, thick with perfume and desperation. You pass a tapestry of knights slaying a dragon, which seems wildly optimistic considering what you're carrying. One of the laundry girls gives you a sympathetic smile. You nod back, trying not to slosh as you do. You once tried flirting with her. Then she saw you accidentally spill part of the Duke's contents onto your own boot. That conversation ended with a firm good day and a sprig of lavender tossed at your chest. You trudge past the wine cellar and into the servants' corridor, where the ceiling drips something that might be water. You've never had the courage to ask. The cook's boy passes you, going the other way, carrying a sack of turnips and wearing a smug grin. He used to envy your post until he found out what it entailed. Now he calls you Sir Poopington whenever the steward's not looking. The next chamber is the Lady Beatrix's. She's sweet. She always says thank you, which feels like a blessing wrapped in a miracle. Her chamber pot is small, delicately painted with roses, and always somehow worse than the king's. There are legends about her diet. You don't want to know. You empty it quickly and say a quiet prayer for your nostrils. Fringe historical tidbit: some nobles added herbs or petals to their pots in an attempt to mask the smell. Chamomile, lavender, mint, basically medieval Febreze. It didn't work. It just made the pot smell like floral regret. Now it's time for the hallway gauntlet. 4 pots, no lids, a hallway of slippery stone, and a dog who has decided you are its nemesis. The dog's name is Sir Rumple. It's small, loud, and disturbingly fast. You grip your yoke and make a break for it. Sir Rumple lunges. You pivot left. A splash, just water thankfully, from the mop bucket, but now you're soaked at the knees and smell like lemony despair. Historians still argue whether servants like you had any chance of upward mobility. Some say loyal service could lead to promotion. Others say once you're labeled a waste handler, you're about as likely to become a knight as a frog is to write a symphony. You press on. The morning light begins to filter through the upper windows, casting long golden streaks across the stone floor. Beautiful, really, if you ignore the fact that one of those streaks is now illuminating the contents of your left-hand pot with an almost divine spotlight. You look away quickly. You reach the stairwell again, your greatest foe. These stairs are steep, slick, and just slightly too narrow for your yoke to fit through comfortably. You've tried angling. You've tried sidestepping. Once, in desperation, you tried crawling. That ended in a bruised rib and a lecture about dignity. You balance each step like a tightrope walker with soup kettles strapped to his arms. One wobble, one sneeze, one ill-placed rat, and you'll be the incident everyone talks about for the next 3 winters. Halfway down, you pause. Not for the view, it's just a mossy wall, but to rest your shoulders. The yoke digs in, and your tunic sticks to your back in damp defiance of the morning chill. You imagine for a moment what it must be like to be the prince. Silk sheets, someone to bathe you, an entire staff to manage your whims, including you. And then, just as quickly, you remember. The prince once mistook his chamber pot for a wine goblet during a late night revel. Power has its limits. You sigh and continue down. At last, you reach the waste yard. It's a wide sunken trench outside the castle walls, lined with wood planks and coated in centuries of shame. You empty each pot methodically, tilting, pouring, rinsing with a splash of water from the well bucket, then stacking them upside down to dry. It's oddly peaceful here. The wind carries the scent away, and for a moment, you're just a person doing a necessary job. A terrible, stomach turning job, but one that no one else wants. Which means, in a way, you're important, indispensable even. And then a bird poops on your shoulder. You stare at the horizon. You wonder what your life would have been like had your father taken up cobbling instead of soup stirring. You wonder if birds do it on purpose. And then you laugh. A small, wheezing thing that bubbles up and escapes before you can stop it. You return to the castle. There are more pots waiting, always more pots. You rise before the sun, long before it actually, and certainly before the nobility and their well-fed dreams even begin to stir beneath their velvet duvets. In fact, you wake up to the smell of other people's digestion before your eyes are fully open, not metaphorically, literally. The air in the servant dormitory is stale, thick with damp stone, mildew, and the faint but ever-present suggestion of someone's forgotten herring supper. The bed is straw, flattened into something more like aggressive hay than cushioning, and your blanket is a reused potato sack that still smells vaguely of tuber. You sit up and stretch, which feels more like asking your joints to wake up with you. They decline. Still, you press on. The castle doesn't wait for comfort, and the pots certainly don't empty themselves. You splash your face with water from a shared basin, cloudy cold, and hosting something suspiciously mobile. Clean enough. Today, like every day, you begin in the East Wing, because royalty doesn't schedule their bodily functions around your convenience, and the Duke of Eastmarch is famously regular. He has also requested that his chamber pot never be collected after sunrise, claiming that the daylight makes him queasy. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine sensitivity or just the Duke being a medieval diva. You trudge down the servants' corridor, lantern swinging on its iron hook. The stone walls sweat. The torches flicker. Somewhere, a guard snores like a dying bagpipe. The castle is technically asleep, but not really. Mice scurry under the floorboards, dogs twitch in their sleep, and something in the shadows always seems to breathe just slightly louder than it should. You keep walking, yoke bouncing lightly on your shoulders, two empty pails clanking in rhythm with your steps. You try to hum to yourself, an old tune your mother used to sing, but the acoustics in these hallways make everything sound like a ghost chant. You reach the Duke's chamber and perform the ritual. Knock once, softly. Wait 6 seconds. Open the door exactly 6 inches. This is crucial. The Duke believes evil spirits can't enter through gaps smaller than a loaf of rye. He has a chart. You don't argue with a man whose wealth is matched only by his digestive unpredictability. You collect the pot. It's a heavy one. Of course it is. You whisper a polite, "Good morning," to no one and retreat. Next is Lady Iseldra's suite. She's the kind of noble who makes a peasant feel seen, mostly because she insists on making eye contact when you enter. It's unnerving, especially when she comments on your appearance while you're holding a bowl of her personal history. This morning she greets you with, "Ah, potboy, you've got a bit of soot on your cheek." Or is that shadow? No matter. Then she waves you off, like she's doing you a favor. Her chamber pot is painted with tiny roses and trimmed in gold. It's also full of what could only be described as enthusiastic content. You try not to think about it too hard. You carry on room after room: the king's study, the nursery, the armory latrine that somehow always smells worse than the stables. You pass the royal musician's quarters, where someone is already tuning a lute with the enthusiasm of a caffeinated squirrel. The pots you collect come in all shapes and conditions. One has a crack that leaks warm betrayal onto your leg. Another has a lid that doesn't quite fit and rattles like a nervous snake every time you step. The worst one, Baron Alric's, is inexplicably sticky. Every day, you've stopped wondering why. And now, the highlight of your route, the royal kitchens. Not because it's pleasant, because it reeks. And not in the comforting stew and bread way you might hope. No, this is where grease, mold, wet linen, and onion skins go to ferment their grievances. You pass through quickly, nodding to the cook's assistant who's already plucking feathers from what might be a goose or a very angry pigeon. He waves, nose wrinkled. You get that look a lot. You head up the back stairwell to the Queen's corridor. These stairs are cruel, steep, spiraling, and clearly designed by someone who hated chamber pot emptiers specifically. Each step groans under your weight, your pails sloshing in protest. By the time you reach the Queen's antechamber, you're sweating through your tunic. The guard on duty gives you the usual glare. You give him your usual nod. It's a whole language of mutual contempt, wrapped in silence. You knock. The Queen's maid opens the door a crack. She's still asleep. She whispers. You whisper back, "Then I'll be quick." You step inside. The Queen, bundled in furs, does not stir. You move silently, retrieving the pot from beneath a chair that costs more than your entire extended family's combined existence. The Queen's pot, naturally, is a masterpiece. Pearl white ceramic with swan motifs and a suspiciously pristine exterior. You've long suspected someone else cleans it before you arrive, just so no one ever knows what royal digestion really looks like. You collect it back out and nod again to the guard. He does not nod back. He never does. The sun is rising now, casting golden beams through the high windows. The castle begins to hum with waking life. Servants scurry, doors creak, someone drops a tray of something and curses creatively in Latin. You return to the servants' courtyard to begin the long, fragrant walk to the waste pit. You pass two maids carrying laundry, who politely veer off the path to avoid your bouquet of odors. You can't blame them. You'd avoid you too. Fringe tidbit of the day. There were actual etiquette manuals in some royal courts, dictating when chamber pots could be emptied and how to carry them to minimize offense. One such rule suggested using a discreet cloth covering to hide the pot entirely. You tried that once. The cloth slipped. The Duke screamed. You no longer used the cloth. By the time you tipped the morning's haul into the trench, now steaming gently like some accursed porridge, the castle bells are ringing. Breakfast is being served. Not for you, of course. You grab your chunk of barley loaf from the scullery shelf and take a bite. It tastes like dust, duty, and a faint hint of the Queen's lavender oil. Another glorious morning in royal service. The pot parade begins in earnest now. What you've done so far, just the warm-up. That was the dainty half. The nobles who only require one pot, maybe two, per night. But now comes the West Wing, the long corridor, the endless doors, 40 rooms in total, and 40 pots, each one a gurgling memoir of digestion, wine, and unchecked power. You brace yourself at the threshold. It stretches ahead of you like a punishment designed by a particularly creative monk. Gilded sconces, velvet runners, high arched ceilings, with angelic faces carved into the stone, every inch of this hallway screams opulence. Every inch also hides a chamber pot, waiting to assault your senses and test your balance. First stop, Lord Gervain. His pot is heavy, lopsided, and always without fail slightly warm. You don't ask why. No one asks why. You collect it quickly, mentally note the chip on the rim, again, and make your way down the hall. Lady Maribella is next, a devotee of rosewater. The pot smells like floral perfume, wrestling a cabbage. Historians still argue whether nobles genuinely believed flower petals could purify waste or if they just enjoyed the illusion. Whatever the case, her pot always contains more petals than content, which you consider a minor miracle. You almost whistle. Then come the bad ones. The Earl of Doric's chamber is dark, and he sleeps with the door open. You tiptoe in, retrieve the pot, and nearly drop it when he snorts mid-dream like a bear discovering sarcasm. You freeze. He mutters something about fish bones and rolls over. You back away like a man avoiding a ghost with gas. Then there's Sir Cedric, a man whose diet consists primarily of red meat, ale, and spite. His pot is wide-mouthed and unapologetically full. He labels it with a ribbon, color-coded depending on his mood. Today's is yellow. You do not want to know what yellow means. You shuffle from room to room, balancing two pots at a time on your yoke, switching them out when you reach your limit. You've developed a technique. Knees bent, arms steady, eyes forward. Never look directly into the pot. That way lies madness. One pot is unusually light. The Duchess of Gwynedd must be ill or traveling. You smile. A small mercy. The next one is unusually not a pot. It's a helmet. Someone has mistaken their knight's ceremonial helm for a receptacle. You grimace. You make a note. You decide not to tell anyone. It's at this point, somewhere around pot 23, that you start humming again. Not from joy, but out of necessity. If you don't make noise, the silence fills with thoughts you'd rather not have. Like whether this is what your life will always be. Whether you'll die mid-empty, slump forward into a trench, and simply become another layer of unfortunate fertilizer beneath a royal rose bush. You hum louder. A few doors down, a maid opens her chamber just as you pass. You exchange nods. She hands you a small cloth bundle. Inside, a honey cake. You almost cry. It's still warm. You tuck it into your apron pocket like treasure, and then you round the corner to the Countess's chambers. The door is ajar, which is unusual. She is not fond of drafts. You knock politely, enter, and are immediately greeted by the sight of three-chamber pots, lined up like contestants in a pageant. One has a cracked rim, one is sloshing ominously. The third is suspiciously foamy. You stare, you blink, you decide not to ask. Fringe. Tidbit. In some castles, there were entire rooms called garderobes, where waste dropped straight down a chute to the moat below. But in many royal residences, especially those with sensitive landscaping, a chamber pot was the more elegant solution. Elegance, of course, being in the eye of the beholder, or the nose of the servant. You begin your return journey, arms shaking, legs wobbly, balance precarious. Then disaster. One of the pots, Sir Cedric's, naturally shifts. The yoke tilts, the ribbon snags on a doorknob. There is a slow motion moment of horror as the pot tips and spills. Not completely, just enough. Onto the velvet runner, onto your boot, onto your soul. You freeze. You consider options. Run? Blame the wind? Pretend nothing happened and hope no one smells it? You reach for a rag. You dab furiously. The smell rises like an insult. You mutter oaths in 3 languages. Then you straighten up, set your jaw, and keep moving. Because what else can you do? You've spilled worse. You reach the end of the hall, drop off the first batch of pots at the washing station, and begin again. Another lap, another load. The pot parade never ends. It simply loops, like a slow, stinky carousel from which no one escapes. Mainstream historical fact. In some courts, particularly in Tudor England, the chamber pot emptiers were sworn to secrecy. Any comment on the contents, frequency, or peculiar habits of their lords and ladies could be punishable by dismissal, or worse. You've heard stories. One lad joked about the Queen's musical mornings and was never seen again. Now you just nod, smile, and carry on. As you collect the final pot, a dainty little thing belonging to a visiting princess, you notice a note tucked beneath it. It reads, "Thank you." 2 words, written in soft ink, signed only with an initial. You stare at it. You fold it carefully. You place it inside your tunic, right above your heart. You still smell like despair and fermented mutton, but for a moment, just one, you feel almost human. And then the yoke creaks, a pot sloshes, and you're reminded, no time to dawdle. The parade must continue. The tools of your tragic trade are simple, but oh, they tell stories. First, the yoke. Not the metaphorical burden, though you certainly carry that too, but the literal wooden beam that rests on your shoulders, carved and worn smooth by years of use. It creaks when it's cold, groans when it's wet, and occasionally leaks a bit of ancient pot residue from its joints. You tried once to add padding, some sheep's wool wrapped in linen. It lasted until the High Steward called it improper. Now you just wince through the splinters. Then the buckets. 2 of them, iron-banded, dented, forever stained with a color that no scrub brush dares challenge. These aren't just any buckets. They're your buckets. You've named them, though never allowed. One is Bertha. Reliable, wide-brimmed, dignified. The other is Percy. Wobbly, slightly tilted, always on the brink of betrayal. Percy has cost you more than one pair of boots. You carry rags too. Not fine cloths, but rough squares cut from worn-out servant uniforms. Fabric that's seen things. One is looped through your belt, ready for emergencies. Another is tucked in your apron pocket. You don't remember the last time either was clean. Honestly, you don't want to. Speaking of aprons, you wear one, of course, made of canvas so stiff it could probably stand on its own. Once white, now somewhere between gray and regret brown. It wraps around your front and ties in the back, though one tie is shorter than the other due to a tragic encounter with a fireplace hook and an impatient hound. You also have gloves, but they're more ceremonial than practical. Thin leather, cracked at the knuckles, offering about as much protection as a soggy biscuit. You wear them anyway, mostly for the illusion. Illusions are everything in royal service. Your morning kit complete, you glance at the small cart tucked near the corner of the yard. It's an upgrade, supposedly, meant to make your job easier. It has squeaky wheels, a tendency to tilt left, and a personality that seems to reject stairs with violent prejudice. You use it anyway. On flat ground, it's a miracle. On cobblestones, it's a menace. Mainstream fact. Many chamber pot carriers in royal courts were issued standard kits. Not all castles were equal. Some were flush with luxury, others flush with, well, not much, but even the bare minimum included a yoke, two pails, and a tunic that said, I've seen things you can't unsee. You remember your first day. You were handed the tools like a knight receiving his sword, except instead of glory and honor, you were promised blisters and nausea. You asked where the gloves were. The steward just laughed, and yet somehow you've become an expert. You've learned the subtle art of counterbalancing Bertha and Percy on your shoulders so that neither tips when a pigeon startles you. You've memorized the layout of the castle's back passages to avoid traffic and gossip. You know which staircases creak, which floorboards shift, and which servants will accidentally bump into you if you don't yield first. There's a system to it all, a rhythm, like a dance, if the dance involved fermented noble output and shame. You also keep tools for emergencies. A scraping stick, self explanatory, a sachet of dried mint to hold beneath your nose, and a pouch of crushed rosemary. Lady Iseldra swears it prevents pestilence, though you suspect she just likes the smell. You use it anyway. Today, while preparing your cart for the next round, you notice something off. Percy has developed a new leak, a tiny one but unmistakable, a slow drip that trails behind you like a breadcrumb path for someone with very bad intentions. You sigh, patch it with wax, mutter a prayer, and keep going. Percy's been with you too long to give up now. As you roll the cart toward the next set of chambers, the wheel catches a loose stone and lurches. One of the pots jumps in protest. You steady it. Not today, you whisper. Not in front of the squires. A boy polishing boots nearby watches you with morbid fascination. Is it true, he asks, that the queen once pooped diamonds? You stare at him. No, you say, but the duke once passed something that sparkled, and I haven't slept since. The boy drops the boot. Fringe tidbit. Some nobles, convinced of the health benefits of gold or gemstones, actually did ingest crushed minerals. Whether for digestive balance or sheer bragging rights, they believed it purified the body. You believe it made your life worse. Historians still argue whether servants like you were given specific training in hygiene. Some say yes, basic instruction in sanitation, lime disposal, and how to not die of the fumes. Others claim most training was learned by doing, which feels about right. You once asked the head steward how to treat a burn from hot pot water. He handed you a cabbage leaf. But the real tool of your trade, more than buckets or gloves, is discretion. You've heard things, seen things. Once you found a letter in a pot, folded, unread. You didn't open it. You returned it to the chambermaid in silence. She never thanked you, but she also never made eye contact again. Once, you witnessed a noble cry into the chamber pot for a full minute before using it. You didn't speak of it. You never would. You are invisible, but not absent. You are ignored, but always there. And your tools, Bertha, Percy, your apron, your mint, are more than accessories. They are the shield and armor of a man who fights a very specific, very fragrant kind of war. You hoist the yoke again. It bites your shoulders. You exhale, adjust, and step forward. Time to get back to work. Royal waste, royal rules. That's the phrase whispered down the servant corridors. Part warning, part mantra. Entirely ridiculous. Because as much as you might assume that human waste is, well, universal, the royals have a way of complicating even the simplest functions of nature. Not only how they go, but what you're allowed to do with it afterward. You can't just chuck it out a window like a common alley dweller. No, there are protocols. Each pot must be handled with a level of discretion, normally reserved for secret military documents. There are designated times for collection, no earlier than half an hour before dawn, no later than breakfast chimes, and routes you must take through the castle to ensure that your sloshing cargo doesn't offend the eyes or noses of anyone deemed important. One time, a new boy tried shortcutting through the East Gallery. He walked right past the bishop, who fainted, allegedly from low blood sugar, but everyone knew it was the smell. The boy was reassigned to stable mucking, barehanded. You took over his route. You did not thank him. Your favorite of the rules, if favorite means most baffling, involves moat protocol. You see, not all waste goes into the dung trench. Some is reserved for ceremonial disposal. Specifically, certain royal chamber pots, typically the kings and queens, must be emptied into the north moat. No one remembers why. Some say it's tradition. Others say the moat fish eat better that way. Historians still argue whether this ritual had religious significance or was just the result of a monarch with too much time and not enough plumbing. The process involves a small balcony, a bucket with an absurdly long handle, and a specific chant that must be mumbled under your breath as you pour. You don't know the words. You make up noises and hope the moat doesn't rebel. Then there's the chain of waste command. You don't just empty pots. You report. Not aloud, of course, but via little tokens, ribbons, chalk marks, folded linens that communicate things to the chamberlain. A red ribbon on the handle, the pot is cracked. A smudge of chalk near the base, the noble has eaten something regrettable. A pot turned upside down and placed by the door, a silent plea for help. You never ask questions, you just obey the code. It's how the system works. Because royalty doesn't like to be reminded that they are, biologically speaking, human. Your job is not just disposal, it's erasure. To make the inconvenient bits of royal life disappear as if by magic. And that takes coordination. At the top is the groom of the stool, the king's personal toilet advisor. He doesn't touch pots. He supervises their disappearance. Beneath him are attendants, then footboys, then you. You exist somewhere between furniture and fungus. One mainstream fact. In certain courts, the groom of the stool was not only respected, but trusted with state secrets. He had the king's ear, sometimes literally, during vulnerable moments. Your own position carries no such prestige. You once tried to offer a cough remedy to the prince while carrying his pot. He asked for your name, then promptly banned you from speaking. Still, the rules keep you safe, mostly. You know not to enter the duchess's room before the bell. You know to always carry the marquis's pot wrapped in velvet. You know never, ever to enter the countess's quarters without humming. Why the humming? No idea. But you forgot once. And what happened? She stared at you for 30 silent seconds, then said, "You have interrupted the balance of my digestion." You were banned for a month. Someone else took your route. The smell was never the same again. Fringe tidbit. In some noble households, there were pot days, when the servants had to present the emptied pots for inspection. Inspection. Cleaned, dried, polished, and placed on a linen-draped table. A noble would walk by, occasionally sniffing, occasionally tapping the rim with a gloved finger. You live in fear of pot day. You clean like your life depends on it, because it might. And if you do make a mistake, if you spill, if you deliver late, if you violate the sacred schedule, there is the chamber reckoning. It's not official, but everyone knows it exists. A cold meal, a cleaning shift in the lower latrines, a lecture from the steward about respecting the flow of dignity, Once a boy was made to wear a sign that read, I am foul of foot and hand. It rhymed in Old Saxon. Somehow that made it worse, so you follow the rules. You step lightly, you nod, you hum, you pour, you erase. Today, as you arrive at the North Moat for the ceremonial pour, you pause. The wind is crisp. The water glints in the early light. A duck watches you with what feels like judgment. You tip the bucket. You make the chant sounds. You watch the waste spiral into the water and vanish. And just like that, another piece of royal reality disappears into the ripples. You stand there a moment longer, not thinking, just breathing. Then you turn, adjust your yoke, and return to the castle. The next pot is already waiting. The castle, as much as it seems carved from stone and pageantry, is a living thing. It breathes. It groans. It leaks from every corner. And you, potboy extraordinaire, are part of its circulatory system, a lowly lymph node in the great lumbering body of monarchy, moving waste from organ to outlet with clockwork consistency. Today, the air is thick with mist, curling through the open corridors and turning the torchlight into eerie halos. It's the kind of morning that makes the tapestries twitch and the suits of armor seem just a little too alert. You've got 6 pots already on the yoke, each capped, wiped, and tied with their respective identifying ribbons. Percy the bucket is behaving himself for once. Bertha feels noble as ever. You're making decent time, which is why, of course, fate decides to intervene. As you turn into the West Wing stairwell, you're greeted by something new, scaffolding. They're repairing the stained glass above the prince's library, which means your usual corridor route is blocked. You sigh and reroute down the cloister path, a shadowy enclosed passage typically reserved for monks, old retainers, and the occasional noble in search of contemplative solitude. You are about to desecrate that solitude with 6 pots of royal consequence. The cloister is damp. The floor is uneven. The arches echo every footstep like you're performing an opera of sloshing doom. Your breath fogs before you. The only light comes from high, narrow windows smeared with rain. You are halfway through, knees bent, balancing like a trapeze artist, when a door creaks open. The bishop steps out. You freeze. He sees you. You both stare. You nod. He nods. And then he says, solemnly, as above, so below. You're not sure what that means, but you nod again, bow slightly, and shuffle past. The silence afterward is louder than most conversations. Fringe historical tidbit. Monks and clergy in castles often had their own chamber pot systems, usually wooden boxes with seats and removable pans beneath. Sometimes their waste was considered less offensive due to presumed spiritual purity. You've emptied a few of those. Let's just say holiness doesn't improve odor. You exit the cloister into the gardener's path. It smells of damp earth and wilted roses, which is still, objectively, an improvement. You reach the waste yard. This section is newer, an annexed trench lined with slate slabs and a trickle of running water. It was commissioned last winter after the old pit overflowed and ruined a visiting duke's leather boots. There's now a sign that says, authorized disposal only, as if someone might sneak in for recreational tipping. You unload the pots. Each one is tilted with reverence and caution. You say a small, silent farewell to each, like sending tiny ships out to sea. Mainstream fact: castle waste management was a huge concern. Bad disposal led to disease, rats, and revolting nobles. Larger castles had entire waste systems, cesspits, drainage tunnels, and sometimes elaborate pulley mechanisms to remove waste from upper floors. You, however, are the pulley. Once the trench is fed, you rinse the pots with water hauled from a barrel. You wipe them, dry them with a stiff cloth, and stack them by type: ceramic, pewter, carved wood, and one that you're pretty sure is made from something resembling ivory, which feels deeply wrong. As you turn to leave, a voice calls out, "It's old Bren, the dung yard master." He waves a hand and tosses you a biscuit. It's hard, vaguely nut shaped, and definitely stale. You bite into it anyway. Hunger doesn't care about flavor. You trudge back to the servants' passage, empty yoke on your shoulders, lighter but already aching. The day is young, and the nobles are waking. Soon the second wave will begin. There's a brief window, perhaps half an hour, where you are free. Free to rest, to eat, to sit. You find your spot behind the herb garden, between the leech barrels and the ale shed. It's quiet. There's a bench. Someone once carved a heart into it, long ago. You sit there now, knees creaking, breathing in the rosemary and damp wood. Historians still argue whether castle servants were given regular rest periods. Some records suggest rotating shifts. Others imply constant toil until collapse. You believe the truth lies somewhere in between. You work until someone yells at you or you fall down. Your eyes close for just a moment. You dream of a different life. In your dream, you're not a pot carrier. You're a scribe. No, a falconer. Someone who touches feathers instead of filth. Someone who walks with nobles instead of trailing their aftermath. In the dream, someone hands you a scroll, not a bucket. And then someone actually hands you a scroll. You wake with a start. A steward stands before you, looking both apologetic and slightly green. "Message from the Marquis," he says. "Urgent." You break the wax seal. It's written in a spidery hand. "Please retrieve and clean the pot immediately. There has been an incident. Do not speak of this to anyone." Of course. The second wave begins. You rise, stretch your back, grab your tools. Time to save another noble from the consequences of their supper. You thought the first wave was brutal, but it's nothing compared to the aftermath of breakfast. You see, nobles don't just wake and relieve themselves. No, they eat, think, stroll. And then, suddenly, as if on cue, half the castle experiences what one might politely call a digestive reckoning. You're halfway to the Marquis's chamber, scroll still tucked in your belt, when the steward catches up with you again. "There's another one," he huffs. "The Duchess of Belmere. Oatcakes disagreed with her." You want to tell him that oatcakes disagree with everyone, but you just nod, because now begins the part of the job that carries real danger. You step into the Marquis's chamber. The scent hits first, a sharp, yeasty note with undercurrents of panic. His pot sits in the center of the room on a silk cushion, which is somehow worse than the contents. He's not in sight, but from behind a folding screen comes a voice. "Just burn the cushion." You oblige. You pour the contents carefully into your emergency travel bucket, which, let's be honest, is just Percy in disguise. You douse the pot with water, scrub, rinse, repeat. The room smells faintly of lavender and ruin. Outside, you notice the telltale signs of trouble: a trail of wet footprints, an abandoned glove, and a dog that looks deeply disturbed. You follow the trail to the Duchess's suite. She opens the door herself. "Don't speak," she says. "Just fix it." You do, with mop, cloth, and a face like stone. Mainstream historical fact. In times of illness, chamber pot duty became a literal lifesaver. In fact, some servants were tasked with reporting the color and consistency of waste to the royal physician. You know this. You've even been asked, once or twice, for your insight. That was a dark week. You trudge back to the waste trench. The sun is now high, and with it comes warmth, terrible aromatic warmth. The contents of the pit bubble lazily. A crow watches you from a branch with what can only be described as glee. As you empty the pot, your eye catches something floating. You squint. It's a glove? No, not a glove. A hand. You freeze. And then you realize it's wooden. A mannequin's hand, probably from the costumer's wing. You laugh. A weak, borderline unhinged laugh. You've seen so much that a rogue hand barely rates as a surprise. You finish up, rinse everything, and return for the next round. And that's when the real fear sets in. The cough. Your throat is dry. Your chest feels tight. You tell yourself it's the scent, the heat, the exertion. But then you hear it from someone else, old Bren, in the waste yard. A rasp. A wheeze. Fringe tidbit. Chamber pot duty wasn't just smelly, it was deadly. Waste, if mishandled, could transmit all manner of diseases, dysentery, cholera, and, most terrifying of all, the plague. Historians still argue whether waste spread the plague directly or merely worsened the conditions that allowed it to flourish. But you've heard the stories. Servants collapsing mid-pour, a rash that starts behind the ears, a fever that burns like coal. You head back inside, suddenly very aware of every itch, every ache, every droplet on your skin. You wash your hands in the kitchen trough. Twice. Then again, with mint water stolen from the apothecary's supply. The cook's assistant gives you a side eye but says nothing. Lunch comes. Barley stew and a hunk of cheese. You sit alone, as always. No one wants to share a bench with the man who carries what you carry. Your hands still smell faintly of Queen Mother and tragedy. You pick at your food. The stew is good today. You think. Hard to tell. And then a voice. Mind if I sit? It's the laundry girl. The one who gave you lavender that time. You nod, stunned. She sits. She doesn't flinch. She even hands you a small cloth sachet. For your pocket, she says, mint and rosemary. Keeps the sickness away. You thank her. You tuck it close. And for a brief moment, you feel something rare. Seen. Not as a servant, not as a function, but as a person. Historians still argue whether castle life offered any comfort to servants. Some say friendships were rare, crushed by hierarchy. Others say alliances were survival. You believe in the quiet kindnesses, the mint sachets, the biscuits, the brief smile on a bad morning. You finish your stew. The cough is gone, for now. And as you rise to collect the next pot, you feel just a little stronger, a little less alone. Lunch is over. But the smell? Oh, it lingers. You scrub your hands again before returning to your route, this time using the good water, slightly less cloudy, occasionally lemon-scented, and locked behind a door labeled for upper use only. You're not technically allowed to touch it, but you figure if you're expected to inhale 4 kinds of royal indigestion before breakfast, you've earned the right to mild citrus. The castle is bustling now. Nobles drift between halls like overstuffed ghosts. Pages sprint with scrolls. The air smells of fresh herbs, melted beeswax, and beneath it all, the rich, earthy bass note of humanity. You move through it like a shadow, unseen, unthanked, unavoidable. There's always that moment after lunch where you try to forget what your hands have touched. You focus on something neutral, clouds, pigeons, your own mortality. And then someone calls your name. Well, not your name, your title. Potman! You turn. It's the royal falconer. His doublet is stained, his face pale. The prince had oysters, he whispers. Oysters and eels. He's asked for additional support. You know what that means. You grab Percy. The prince's wing is ostentatious even by royal standards. Gilded everything. Carpets thick enough to lose a boot in. Portraits of ancestors who all look vaguely constipated. The guards eye you with distaste. You return the sentiment silently. Inside, you find the evidence of culinary overconfidence. 3 pots, one broken. A discarded slipper. You clean it all in silence. The prince doesn't acknowledge you, of course. He lies on a chaise, moaning softly. His dog, a miserable pug named Clarence, farts and glares at you like this is your fault. As you work, you breathe through your mouth. It helps. A little. Then something odd catches your attention. The pot isn't just full, it's shimmering. You look closer. Glitter. Fringe tidbit of the day. Some nobles believe that consuming powdered pearls or crushed minerals enhanced vitality. You once overheard the queen's maid mutter, "She eats silver, says it's divine." Historians still argue whether these diets were status symbols, genuine medicine, or just medieval wellness fads gone horribly wrong. Either way, it means you end up emptying sparkle-covered stool. Again, back in the yard, you rinse the pot, half expecting a unicorn to emerge. No such luck. You sit for a moment on the stone ledge behind the dovecote where the smell of birds almost cancels out everything else. Almost. You pull out the sachet the laundry girl gave you. Hold it to your nose. Inhale. It smells like earth and kindness. You tuck it back into your tunic. Your moment of peace is short-lived. A potman. It's the court minstrel this time. The king's hounds have gotten into the bishop's quarters. There's confusion and a mess. Of course, you grab your yoke. Bertha and Percy clank into place like old comrades. You trudge off once more. Mainstream fact. In larger castles, chamber pot duty could extend to animal waste, especially in colder months when dogs and falcons were kept indoors. You've mopped after mastiffs, scraped after squirrels. Once, you cleaned up after a bear. Yes, a bear. The Duke of Chisbury had one. Said it soothed his humors. The bishop's chamber is a disaster. Scrolls torn, cushions shredded. The bishop himself is in the corner, clutching a censer and muttering prayers in Latin. The dogs look pleased. You do your work. You do all of your work. And you do it with the poise of a man who knows he will never ever be thanked. But as you carry the last pot away, the bishop pauses his chanting just long enough to murmur, "Bless you, my son." You nod. Then you go rinse off a dog that has glitter on its snout and what may or may not be eel entrails in its fur. By now it's mid-afternoon. The sun is high, the courtyard buzzing, and your legs ache with the deep bone weariness of someone whose Fitbit would explode in despair if it knew the steps you've taken. You drop off your now clean pots at the linen room for drying. You wipe your face with a damp rag and sit beside the kitchen hearth. The cook tosses you a crust. It tastes like sawdust and sympathy, but you eat it anyway. You stare into the fire and wonder, not for the first time, what would have happened if you'd been born a baker, or a monk, or a mushroom farmer. Anything but a man who measures time in pots. Time to descend, literally and emotionally. You leave the hearth, brush the crumbs from your apron, and prepare for the most dreaded part of your daily round, the lower levels. Below the castle kitchens, beyond the scullery and past the wine cellars, lies the undercroft, and within that humid belly of stone and regret, the servants' latrines. Yes, even you have your limits, but this pushes them. You light your lantern. The air is already different, cooler, wetter, somehow aware. The stairs spiral downward, carved into damp rock, slick with the memories of centuries. The walls sweat, your boots squelch. You duck under low arches designed for men half your height and twice your spine. Flexibility. At the bottom, you meet Tobias. He is the Undercroft steward, the sort of man whose face seems permanently carved into a grimace, and whose hobbies likely include inventory lists and passive aggression. He nods, then gestures to the latrine corridor like a doorman ushering you into a haunted opera. Overflow, he says. Just that, then disappears into the shadows. Of course it's overflow. You reach the latrines. These are not chamber pots. These are trenches. Stone channels flushed, loosely defined, by buckets or occasionally a divine act of rain. They are shared by cooks, stable hands, maids, and anyone else not blessed with private ceramic dignity. And today, they are very full. You sigh and set to work. Mainstream historical fact. Many castles had rudimentary indoor latrines, especially in lower quarters. Waste often funneled through vertical shafts or stone-lined drains, leading to cesspits or moats. But those systems rarely worked as intended, and when they didn't, people like you had to intervene with buckets and shovels and prayers. You shovel, you scrub, you gag once, discreetly. Fringe. Tidbit. Some servants believed that smearing the latrine walls with crushed herbs kept demons away. You're not sure about demons, but the rosemary paste does cover the smell. Barely. You pour bucket after bucket into the auxiliary trench. Tobias reappears with lime powder. Dust it, he mutters, and vanishes again. You spread the powder like someone seasoning a cursed stew. Halfway through, you pause for water. Not to drink, gods no, but to rinse your face. A rat watches you from a beam. You nod at him. He nods back. You're not friends, but you understand each other. Then you hear it. A faint plip from the far end. You raise your lantern, and you see it. A hat, floating. Fine velvet, gold trim, a feather bent sideways like it gave up on hope. You fish it out with your scraping stick, dripping and shuddering. You recognize it. Lord Hemswick's ceremonial cap. You do not ask questions. You wrap it in cloth, mark it discreetly with a chalk X, and set it aside. This will be tomorrow's problem. You finish your rounds in the Undercroft. The floors are cleaner. The air is passable. You wash again. Hands, face, elbows, eyes, spirit. And then you climb. The stairs feel longer going up. Always do. Your knees ache. Your yoke digs into your collarbone. The lantern flickers. You reach the scullery door and push it open into light and noise and sudden smells of cinnamon, broth, and roasted something. Back in the castle proper, everything seems unnaturally bright. People move like they have purpose, like their day hasn't been spent elbow deep in Noble's regret. You refill Percy. Bertha gets a break. You adjust your straps, because now it's time for the guest wing. You dread the guest wing. You never know who is in there, or what they've eaten. Some come from the north, where pickled things dominate. Others from the south, where spice and citrus combine in volatile, new ways. You've seen things that defy logic. Once, a pot from a visiting lord contained what looked suspiciously like feathers and a small bone. He claimed it was a fasting technique. You still have nightmares. Today, the guest wing is busy. Laughter echoes down the marble halls. Servants rush with wine jugs. A bard strums something vaguely cheerful. And through it all, you glide silently, bucket swinging, eyes on the floor. First pot, light, fragrant, possibly unused. You whisper a thank you to whatever saint governs bowels. Second pot, heavy metallic tang, you don't ask. Third pot, chipped, filled to the brim, and covered with a cloth napkin that says, Compliments of the house. You laugh out loud. It's either that or weep. You pass a noble woman in a towering wig. She wrinkles her nose but says nothing. That's fine. You're not here for compliments. You're here for containment. By the time you've collected 8 more pots, your yoke feels like it's dragging you to the floor. Your hips ache. Your back is plotting mutiny. Your fingers are permanently pruned. Historians still argue whether chamber pot carriers were rotated daily or kept in permanent positions. You suspect the latter. No one else would take this job more than once. You pass through the side chapel on the way to the courtyard. A monk offers you a wafer. You decline. You've had enough strange textures for one afternoon. In the yard, you set down your burden. The breeze lifts your hair. The trench steams politely. You empty, rinse, repeat. You close your eyes, and for just a moment, the breeze feels holy. You tell yourself, just get through the next 3 hours. That's it. 3 hours, 180 minutes, a couple of pot circuits, maybe a second dog incident, a surprise vomit basin, and an inexplicably musical fart from the court jester. But nothing you haven't seen before. But the truth is, this stretch, late afternoon into early evening, is where time begins to melt. The nobles head to the great hall for supper. Their laughter echoes off the stone walls. Platters clatter. Wine spills. Jokes are made. You hear none of it directly, of course. You're stationed outside by the hall's side corridor, tasked with what's generously known as accident watch. That is to say, you're waiting in case someone doesn't make it to the pot in time. You lean against the wall, Percy by your side, arms crossed. You could nap standing up by now. You've trained for it. And then a page stumbles out of the hall, pale and wide-eyed. It's the Count of Windermere, he says, like announcing an incoming hurricane. He's requested immediate evacuation. You don't ask if he means himself or the pot. You just go. You reach the guest chamber before the Count does. A blessing. You place the pot, prep the cloths, light a scented taper. And then, like some dark miracle, the door bursts open, and in totters the Count, sweating, swaying, and swearing vengeance upon duck liver pate. You step outside. You wait. You ponder your choices in life. Fringe tidbit. In some royal courts, it was considered impolite to excuse oneself during meals. Instead, nobles would relieve themselves behind a privacy screen within the banquet hall itself. You shudder at the thought. You've cleaned one of those screens. You're still not over it. Eventually, the Count emerges. He nods solemnly, wipes his brow with a monogrammed sleeve, and says, "You are a knight of olfactory courage." You consider framing that. Back down the hall, supper is reaching its crescendo. You can hear the clanging of tankards, the poorly tuned lute, and the unmistakable sound of someone arguing with a roast pheasant. You slip away to the alcove near the kitchens, where discarded bones, half-chewed bread, and apple cores gather in a quiet rebellion against table manners. It smells almost pleasant if you ignore the fish head. One of the kitchen girls tosses you a roasted beet. "You look like you need iron," she says. You nod and eat it whole, like a medieval raccoon. Mainstream historical fact. Servants often subsisted on scraps, known as leavings. Though not glamorous, this diet was usually healthier than the nobles, whose rich fare and dubious hygiene led to constant digestive crises. Hence your entire job. Back in the trench yard, you dispose of the Count's contribution. Percy groans as you tip him. You groan back. It's a whole duet. Then, a bell rings. Not the supper bell. The emergency bell. You freeze. There are two emergency bells in the castle. One for fire, one for vomit. This one is faster. Higher pitched. Definitely vomit. You sprint. Well, you hobble quickly. But in your mind, it's a heroic gallop. The noise leads you to Lady Bethel's chamber. You burst in and stop. It's everywhere. On the floor, on the rug, on the tapestry. How she managed to aim up, you'll never know. She's sobbing softly into a handkerchief. The cherries, she moans, they were rebellious. You get to work, mopping, scrubbing, scraping dried cherry skin from the grout lines, like a man unearthing tiny fruity fossils. The lady watches you, then says, "You are very composed." "I've cleaned worse," you say. She pauses, then unexpectedly laughs. Just once. A short, grateful bark of laughter that catches you both off guard. You smile. And in that moment, you are not a pot carrier. You are a person. A tired, smelly, slightly damp person, but a person nonetheless. Historians still argue whether lower servants had any genuine rapport with the nobility. Some accounts claim warmth. Others suggest complete invisibility. But you know this. When someone's kneeling in a puddle of their own mistakes, status evaporates faster than spilled mead. You finish your work. Lady Bethel thanks you, and hands you a small silver coin. "For soap," she says. You accept it. You will absolutely spend it on honey bread. Back in the corridor, the torchlight has softened. Evening has arrived, and with it, a strange stillness. The nobles are sated. The halls are quieter. The castle breathes slower. You take your time on the next round. Empty pots, rinse cloths, check that the queen's pot, enameled, discreet, surprisingly fragrant, is in its rightful place. You light one more lavender taper in the chamberlain's anteroom, and then you sit, just for a second, just long enough to feel your feet again. You know the final round is coming soon. Bedtime collection. But for now, you rest. You look out through the arched window. The sky is ink blue. The stars are blinking awake. And for the first time all day, the air smells like nothing at all. A rare and perfect thing. Nightfall means one thing. The final round. You know it by the shift in air. The castle's great exhale. The fires burn lower. The voices soften, and doors begin to close one by one, like eyelids on a giant stone. Beast. It's time to move. Potman. This is the round that tests your balance, patience, and, perhaps most crucially, your gag reflex. Because while nobles may act refined by candlelight, what they leave behind in their nighttime pots is anything but poetry. You start at the east wing. Lady Dorian first. Her chamber smells faintly of violets and melancholy. Her pot is barely touched, as always. You suspect she's too delicate to admit to bodily functions. You retrieve it silently, nod as she peers at you over the edge of a book, and move on. Then Sir Alric. His chamber reeks of onions and old chainmail. He has filled his pot enthusiastically. You try not to judge, but you do wonder if he's competing in some unspoken contest. You empty, wipe, rinse, the usual. Down the hall, the king's valet meets you at the door with a grim nod. He's sleeping. Try not to rattle. Of course, no rattling, no breathing loudly, no being perceived. You slip into the king's chamber like a whisper. Golden canopy, bearskin rug, a bed so large it has its own postcode. The pot rests by the window, half filled with the royal majesty's late-night cider consequences. You bow instinctively as you lift it, just in case the monarchy can feel it in their sleep. Fringe tidbit. In some royal households, chamber pots were named. The King of France reportedly had one called Le Trône Silencieux. You once tried naming one of your regular pots Gerald. You never spoke of it again. You continue your route. The hall's quieter now. The torchlight is soft and flickering. You can hear owls through the open arrow slits. And then you pause. Something is off. You smell something wrong. Not the usual wrong, a different wrong. You follow your nose past the steward's quarters, past the chapel door, and down a narrow side hallway, rarely used by anyone except the rat catcher and a maid who swears she hears ghosts. At the end, Lord Pembury's chamber. You knock. No answer. You nudge the door. It opens. Inside, the pot lies shattered. The floor slick with, well, let's call it evidence of distress. Lord Pembury himself is face down on the bed, snoring like an ox with sinus issues. A goblet lies beside him, half full of something too green to be wine. You sigh. You retrieve a spare pot from your emergency kit. You clean the floor as best you can with rags, herbs, and a small handful of resolve. You place the new pot by his bed. You scrawl a discreet note. Mind the corner. You leave without waking him. Historians still argue whether nobles were more prone to food poisoning than commoners. The record suggests yes, largely due to their love of undercooked meat and suspect delicacies. You, however, believe in a simpler truth. They were never told no, and that leads directly to oysters in questionable condition and you scrubbing parquet flooring at midnight. As you move through the next chambers, something strange happens. People start thanking you. Lady Iseldra, clutching a candle, says, "Bless you for your silence." A young knight nods and offers you a candied almond. You decline. It's sticky, and your hands are occupied with a particularly stubborn pewter pot. Even the high steward gives you a grunt that might be respect, and you realize they see you, not fully. Not in the way they'd see a noble or a knight or even a favorite dog, but they notice that you keep their secrets, that you erase their embarrassments, that you come every night, bucket in hand, and leave their dignity intact. There's something in that. A quiet kind of power, mainstream fact. Chamber pot emptiers in royal courts often held an unusual position, technically low in status, yet essential to the daily function of the household. Some even used their proximity to the royals to advance, gaining favor, secrets, and the occasional promotion. You're not aiming for a promotion, just a day without glitter. You finish the final corridor. 6 pots. 5 were standard. 1 was alarming. You don't want to talk about it. You make your way back through the central hall, where the chandeliers have dimmed and the marble floor reflects only your weary footsteps. The weight of the day presses into your spine like a second yoke. Your hands are raw. Your eyes sting. Your stomach reminds you that lunch was 3 centuries ago. But the castle is quiet, and you've done your part. You rinse the last pots in the basin near the stables. You stack them neatly on the drying rack. You wipe down your tools, yoke, buckets, cloths, and hang them on their pegs. Bertha gets a pat. Percy gets a side eye. You head to the back alcove. There's a bench there. Someone's left a folded cloak on it, clean, soft. The edges embroidered with tiny lavender sprigs. No note. But you know who it's from. You sit. You wrap it around your shoulders. You let yourself exhale. Outside, the moon is high. The stars are blinking lazily. And for the first time all day, you feel almost clean. You close your eyes for what feels like a blink. When you open them, it's morning again. Not dawn, not rooster chirp, mist on the moat morning. No, this is the groaning from your spine morning. The sky's barely pink, the castle's still half asleep, but your legs already feel like someone replaced your kneecaps with damp scones. You rise, you adjust the cloak, still warm from your body heat and faintly herb scented. You fold it carefully and tuck it away in the storage alcove under the bench. You're not a sentimental man. Your job doesn't allow for that, but some things feel too rare to toss aside. Back on your feet, back to your route. First stop, the Queen's antechamber. Her personal maid greets you with the same sniff of distaste she's given you for 2 years straight. You find it oddly comforting. You nod, take the velvet-wrapped pot, and begin your day once more. Today's pots are heavier, possibly symbolic, possibly just the result of last night's feast featuring 5 kinds of meat and 1 regrettable pudding. Your words, not the kitchen's. You pass Sir Alric in the corridor. He tips his hat. You think it might be a gesture of respect, or he's trying to stretch his back. Either way, you nod. You're halfway through the noble wing when you run into a wall. Not literally, that would be better. No, you run into the auditor, an annual horror. Clad in stiff linen and a glare, the castle's auditor of cleanliness, an actual title, appears with a clipboard, a feather quill, and absolutely no joy in his soul. Spot checks today, he announces, as though declaring war. Mainstream fact. Certain royal courts kept strict records of sanitation. Pots were counted, lids were weighed, cloths were inspected. It wasn't about hygiene, it was about order. A well-run pot system was seen as a mark of a civilized court, which is ironic, considering the job involves human compost. You follow him silently. First stop, Lord Crispin's room. You unlock the door, lift the pot, and hold it up. The auditor peers inside. He nods. Color acceptable. You pretend that sentence never entered your life. Next stop, Duchess Iona. Her pot is, as always, lined with lace. Lace. The auditor frowns. Unnecessary embellishment. You quietly note that no one tells her that to her face. Then, a problem. The auditor stops cold outside the nursery wing. Servant's pot is misaligned. He's right. It's half an inch off its floor mark. You fix it. He writes a note. You consider screaming into your tunic. Fringe tidbit. In one castle, chamber pots were fitted with bells that rang when full. A tinkle bell. The inventor was exiled for unrelated reasons. Probably. The inspection ends without anyone fainting. You survive. Barely. You trudge to the waste yard. You empty your load. The trench burps. You pretend not to hear it. As you rinse, the laundry girl appears. She doesn't speak. She just hands you a damp cloth. Lemon, she says, for your hands. You thank her. You want to write her a poem. You settle for a smile and a muttered, "You're the best part of this job." She blushes. You both look at the ground. Then she says, "You smell slightly less awful today," and vanishes like a woodland sprite. Your heart grows 3 sizes, then shrinks back to normal when Percy tips awkwardly and sloshes your boot. Afternoon brings its usual routine. You're summoned to the scribe's chamber. The pot is light, but the room is heavy with parchment dust and philosophical despair. The scribe, deep in a treatise on the nature of time, barely notices you. You glance at his scroll. Something about the circularity of suffering. You nod. You feel that. You're heading to the stables when a stable boy stops you. Saw a rat the size of a cat near the moat. You nod. Say hi to him for me. You're tired. You finish your route. You stack pots. You wipe the rims. You check for cracks. You find one. It's the gold inlaid pot used by Baroness Merla. Of course it is. You set it aside for repair. You sit. You rub your hands. You breathe. Historians still argue whether castle workers found fulfillment in routine. You'd say yes, if by fulfillment they mean a sort of numb, resigned rhythm, interrupted occasionally by biscuits. But even that rhythm has its moments. Tonight, the stars arrive early. The breeze smells of sage and soot. The kitchens are quiet. The castle sleeps. You hear a lute in the distance. You stretch out your legs, and for a brief second, you imagine what it'd be like to live one floor higher. Just one. But then you remember the things they eat, and the sounds they make, and you lean back against the wall, grateful to be exactly where you are. Even if it smells like duck liver and lavender, you've come to know the castle by sound. The clink of goblets means someone's drunk enough to forget where their pot is. The scratch of slippers means someone sneaking toward the corridor pot and hoping to avoid a servant's gaze. And the hush, that soft, almost reverent silence that falls just after the evening bell, means the castle has officially entered pot prime time. This is the hour of accidents, second suppers, and questionable midnight snacks making their swift return. You're on high alert. Well, medium alert. You're slouched near the corner hearth with Percy, Bertha, and your third blister of the week, just trying to enjoy the relative quiet before something explodes. Figuratively, hopefully. You hear it first, a crash. Then, I'm fine, which is the official noble declaration of not being fine. You drag yourself to the source, the Dowager Countess's room. Now, you respect the elderly, especially the ones who remember you exist. But the Countess? She believes servants are fairy folk who live in the walls. Last week, she tried to tip you in chestnuts. She opens the door herself, wearing a nightgown, pearls, and an expression of supreme confusion. There's been an upset, she says, waving vaguely toward the hearthrug. You look, there has indeed been an upset. You count two pots, one full, one broken, a pile of shredded newspaper, a misplaced cat, and what appears to be a wig tangled in a tapestry. You nod. You get to work. Mainstream historical fact. Elderly nobility often suffered from digestive disorders exacerbated by rich diets and the complete lack of modern medicine. Their pots, bless them, were both frequent and full of surprises. You clean the mess with your usual efficiency. The Countess offers you a toffee. You accept it, mostly because it's the closest thing to dinner you've had in 5 hours. You exit into the hallway and nearly collide with the royal physician. He pauses, squints, and says, "Still upright, eh?" You nod. He adds, "Impressive." That's the closest thing to a compliment you've heard all day. You continue. The halls are dim now. The sconces flicker. Somewhere, someone is arguing over chess. Somewhere else, someone is vomiting into a vase. You stop at the music room. The lutenist has passed out, face down on his strings. His pot is untouched, but his shoes are not. You clean what you can, light a clove candle, and leave a polite note. Next time, aim down. And then the worst thing happens. A scream, not a loud one. A short, sharp yelp, like someone sat on a hedgehog. You drop everything. You follow the sound. You find it in the Duchess of Summerdale's dressing room. She is perched on a stool, surrounded by shattered porcelain and the unmistakable smell of rosewater mixed with disaster. "The dog," she says, gesturing vaguely. There is indeed a dog. A spaniel, looking proud. "The dog kicked it," she clarifies. Historians still argue whether pets were allowed free rein in royal living quarters. Some say they were pampered and welcome everywhere. Others insist they were confined. You have a simpler view. Pets go where they please, and you clean up where they go. You sweep the shards, blot the carpet, Replace the pot. The Duchess does not thank you, but she does nod, which, in this castle, is basically a sonnet. Fringe tidbit. In one notorious case, a noble's pot was stolen by a rival's monkey. The resulting chase involved 5 guards, 2 maids, and one very confused bishop. You weren't there, but you've heard the tale whispered over ale. You leave the Duchess's room and realize your back is screaming. Not whispering, not gently complaining. Full volume screaming. You lean against a column, just for a second, just to breathe. That's when the jester appears. He doesn't speak. He just hands you a roll. Bread. Still warm. You blink. That don't make it weird, he says. You're the only one who cleans my basin. Respect. And just like that, he vanishes down the corridor, bells jingling. You eat the roll. It is glorious, soft, buttery, possibly illegal in 3 counties. You finish your final corridor. 4 rooms, 5 pots. One birdcage mishap that isn't your job, but somehow becomes your job. You make it back to the waste yard. You empty Percy. Bertha follows. You rinse. You scrub. You hang the cloths. You breathe. The stars are brighter tonight. A full moon peers over the castle wall like a curious guest. The air is cooler, softer. Someone's baking something sweet for morning. You can smell it. Apples, maybe. Or plums. You sit by the drying rack, and for a few minutes, you do nothing. Absolutely, gloriously nothing. Historians still argue whether those moments of stillness meant anything to people like you, but you know better. They mean everything. The moon is high. The castle sleeps, or at least pretends to. And you? You rise again. The bench has warmed to your shape. Percy's leaning like he needs a chiropractor. Bertha's handle is split, slightly, from yesterday's stumble on the chapel stairs. You really should tell someone about that. You won't. This next bit, this is the ghost hour. Not because you believe in spirits, though the rat catcher swears the south turret moans in Latin every solstice, but because this is when everything is still, but your work isn't done. You begin the castle's final circuit. These are the quiet pots, the unspoken ones, the ones that don't get listed in ledgers or inspected by auditors, the ones in the scribe's corner, the stuttering page's room, the night watch captain's closet. Servants like you, lower, forgotten, and just as in need of somewhere to put things at 2 a.m. You enter the barracks hallway. It smells of leather, hay, and tired dreams. The soldier's pot is half full and blessedly unscented. You swap it silently. He never wakes. You visit the laundry alcove. The washerwoman's pot is cracked. You make a note to bring her a new one tomorrow. You clean it anyway. Of course you do. And then something odd. In the kitchen scullery, a candle is lit. You tread softly. Inside, you find the night cook, an old man who speaks more to broth than to people, kneeling by his hearth, stirring a pot of something thick and fragrant. Soup, he mutters, glancing up. You look hollow. You don't argue. He hands you a bowl. You sip. Carrot, leek, salt. It tastes like kindness disguised as vegetables. Mainstream historical fact. Some castles allowed certain trusted servants to share food from the night batch, usually stews meant for guards and night workers. It wasn't generosity. It was strategy. Fed workers faint less. The cook says nothing more. You nod your thanks and slip out into the courtyard again. You're almost done. Just a few more quiet corners. You head toward the chapel. Not the grand one, too fancy, but the little side chapel where the monks sometimes snore in shifts. There's a basin tucked in the back. It's yours to empty. No one tells you to, but no one else will. You approach with reverence. not religious, but habitual. Inside, a novice sits on a bench, humming to himself. He doesn't see you. You clean quietly, respectfully. Then he speaks. You carry heavy things. You glance up. Pots, you say? Mostly. No, he says. Other things. You want to laugh. Instead, you nod. That too. He returns to humming. You leave. And then the final stop. Your own. Yes, even you have one. A chipped little pot in a tiny alcove beside the waste trench. It's not labeled. It's not dignified. But it's yours. You clean it last. Always last. You rinse. You dry. You stack it gently. Then you look around. The stars blink. The sky has turned that deep indigo just before dawn. And for a moment you allow yourself a fantasy that someone someday will write a scroll not about kings or battles, but about this: the trenches, the pots, the quiet dignity of doing what no one else wants to do. Historians still argue whether the lives of low-born workers mattered in the great sweep of history. You already know the answer, because when the queen needed her chamber cleaned at midnight, it wasn't a knight who came. When the physician needed to check for signs of illness, it wasn't a baroness who lifted the lid. When the castle needed to function, it was you who moved through its veins, unseen but essential. Fringe, tidbit. There's an old superstition that anyone who cleans another person's pot inherits a piece of their sorrow. If that's true, you are a mosaic of noble regrets. But somehow, that's not the worst thing to be. You sit for a moment longer, the yoke now resting across your knees. You rub your palms. The blisters are old friends now. Your back makes noises that defy anatomy. And then footsteps. Soft. Familiar. The laundry girl again. She holds out something. A fresh tunic. Clean, plain, still warm from drying. You blink. I had time, she says. You take it. You don't know what to say, so you say nothing. She doesn't expect thanks. She just smiles, brief, small, and walks away, her footsteps disappearing into the dark. You hold the tunic in your lap. For a moment, you just sit there, clean cloth in hand, under the stars, and you let yourself feel it. A strange, rare thing. Hope. You change into the new tunic. It feels unnatural at first. Too clean, too soft. Your old shirt had the comforting stiffness of wear, sweat, and soapstone. This one, it still smells like lavender and steam, but after a moment, you settle into it, like a beetle crawling into a fresh shell. Percy and Bertha get their rest now. You lean them against the tool wall, the wood still damp from the rinse. You pat each one gently, like a farmer telling his oxen, "Good work today. Try not to fall apart tomorrow." You stretch. Your shoulders pop. Your knees disagree. And then it begins again. Not the work, but the rituals of post-work. There's a rhythm here too. You scrape the last of the lime powder from under your nails. You hang your belt where the rats won't chew it. You light a stub of beeswax from the chapel's discard pile and use it to guide your way to the drying cellar. Most servants would avoid the drying cellar at night. Too many whispers, too many cold drafts from nowhere. But for you, it's a sanctuary. Warm stones, the hum of sleep-soaked fabric, and best of all, no pots. You sit on a barrel and lean back. Close your eyes. Let the quiet wrap around you like a second cloak. Mainstream fact: royal courts employed hundreds of specialized servants, each with their own hierarchy. Chamber pot workers sat low on the ladder, yet ironically knew more about the bodily affairs of the elite than most scribes or stewards. The deeper you are in filth, the more truth you tend to find. A door creaks. You don't move. It's the cook again. He sets down a bundle. "Bread for tomorrow," he mutters. "Still warm." You nod. "You spoil me." "I forget you exist most days," he replies and disappears. You smile. The bread is dense, crusty, Perfect. You tear a piece off, eat slowly. Fringe tidbit. Some castles flavored bread with crushed rosemary or nettle to cleanse the soul. You're not sure about your soul, but your mouth is grateful. You hear a bell in the far tower. The 6th hour. Morning shift is creeping up. The stable hands will rise soon. The guards will swap. The noble children will stir and immediately ask for sweetmeats, and an orange they won't finish. You rise. There's still one last thing to do. You slip quietly through the corridor behind the kitchens and make your way to the record room. Technically, you're not allowed here. Technically, you don't exist on paper, but someone has to update the privy register. And if you don't do it, who will? You enter. The room smells of wax and dust. Scrolls line the walls like parchment battalions. You find the small leather book tucked on the lowest shelf. Waste Management, West Wing. You flip to the day's page. You write, pots cleared. 47 overflow incidents. 3. Fragrant anomalies. 2 audits survived. 1. Gifts received. 4. Bread, toffee, almond, tunic. Dignity lost. Hard to say. You hesitate. Then, at the bottom, in the tiniest script, still here, you close the book. Slide it back into place. You pause before leaving, one hand resting on the spine. Historians still argue whether records like these were real. Some claim they're apocryphal or jokes. But you know better. When your job is to erase the messes of others, sometimes the only way to remember you were here is to write it down yourself. Back through the hall, past the scribe's lamp, still burning, past the portrait of the Duke, who once banned onions after a dream told him they were cursed. You make your way to your cot. Tucked into the wall behind the herb racks, it's barely long enough for your legs. The pillow is burlap. The blanket smells faintly of time and history. You lie down. You let the weight slide off. No pots. No yolk. No smells. Well, fewer smells. Just you. And rest. But before your eyes close, you whisper into the dark, like a prayer to no one in particular. You did good, Potman. And in the stillness of that moment, you almost believe it. You wake with the distinct sensation that your spine has folded itself into a medieval manuscript. There is no rooster, no bell, no celestial visitation. Just your own back, announcing, congratulations, you've survived another day as a walking, breathing mop. You roll onto your side, slowly, carefully. Everything creaks, including the cot, including your knees, including your will to rise. And yet, you do, because the sun doesn't care about your lumbar issues. The pots are waiting. They always are. You wash your face in the barrel outside the herb racks. It smells faintly of mint and rat. You consider this an upgrade. The tunic still feels strange, too clean, too soft, but you wear it. A gift is a gift, even if it makes the other servants look at you like you've accidentally become someone important. Breakfast is, as ever, not really a thing. Someone has left half an apple on the woodpile. You eat it. You hope it wasn't a rat's. If it was, you're claiming dominance by digestion. Then you check the ledger. Someone, possibly the steward, has drawn a frowning face next to today's date. You nod solemnly. Yes, that's fair. You shoulder your yoke, greet Percy and Bertha, who both groan in wood and iron sympathy, and begin your route. Today's highlight? The royal cousins have arrived. You know this because suddenly there are extra pots, all slightly too ornamental to function, and yet filled with the usual grim evidence that nobles, for all their lace and lineage, still process stew like everyone else. Mainstream historical fact. During royal visits, chamber pot staff were often doubled or tripled to accommodate increased usage. The more nobles present, the more drama ensued, from forgotten pots under banquet tables to dueling over who got the porcelain one. You've already had three near misses. One involving a sloshing pot and a small dog that leapt into your path like a four-legged trebuchet. One involving a confused footman who thought your bucket was a chamber orchestra's percussion instrument. And one involving the Count of Harrowmere, who insisted on explaining in detail what he'd eaten the previous night while you held his pot, still warm. Fringe tidbit. Some nobles believed their health could be determined by the musical tone of their chamber pot's contents. One court physician in Bavaria wrote sonatas based on it. He died alone. Shocking. By midday, you're sweating through your nice tunic. It now has a stain, possibly beetroot, possibly something you'd rather not name. You empty the guest wing's pots with practiced swiftness. You avoid eye contact. You pretend you can't hear the flute lesson going horribly wrong 2 doors down. Then something strange happens. You're summoned to the Queen's secretary. You assume it's a mistake, but you go anyway. The secretary greets you without looking up from his scroll. The Queen has asked, he says, whether you could handle her mother's pot. Personally, from now on. You blink. Me? She says you're quiet, and you don't smell like beef anymore. She appreciates that. You nod slowly. This is not quite a promotion, but it's something, a royal request. You accept. You are given a new pot to add to your rotation. Ivory handled, surprisingly light, embossed with a tiny crown and a motto that reads Postea Regina. You don't ask for a translation. You assume it's Latin for please don't drop me. As you carry it to its appointed place, you feel something unexpected. Pride. Tiny, awkward, slightly stained pride. You deliver it to the Queen Mother's chamber. She's sitting by the window. She looks up. Ah, you must be the pot boy, she says, her voice like aged velvet. I've heard you're discreet. You nod. Good, she says. That makes one of you. She returns to her embroidery. You place the pot with quiet reverence. Historians still argue whether chamber staff in royal courts were truly invisible or just willfully ignored. You know it's both, but every now and then someone sees you, and it feels like being made of more than calluses and cloth. Later that day, the cook gives you a pastry. Thank you for not telling anyone about the potato incident, he mutters. You nod. You hadn't planned to. You eat the pastry by the grain store. It's apple and spice and possibly a bribe. You accept. You pass the laundry girl in the corridor. She raises an eyebrow at your new stain. I liked the tunic better yesterday, she says. So did I, you reply. She snorts. The day ends. You empty the last pots into the trench. The waste burbles like a contented ogre. You rinse Percy and Bertha. You wipe the rims. You hang the cloths. And for a moment, in the gathering twilight, you realize something. You are not just surviving this job. You are somehow impossibly good at it. You're halfway through scrubbing a particularly irritable pot when your shoulder seizes up like a medieval bear trap. You drop the brush, you inhale, you exhale through your teeth like a leaky bellows, and that's when you realize you're getting sick. Not dramatically, not in the fainting into the moat, clutching a fevered brow sort of way, but sick enough that your hands tremble, that your knees feel like boiled turnips, that your temples pound to the rhythm of the castle's endless drip. And the worst part? You still have to work. There are no sick days for chamber pot carriers. If you don't show up, pots overflow, stench accumulates, the castle descends into chaos. Probably not immediately, but enough to be noticed. Enough for someone to barge into your alcove and say, "Where is the lad who deals with our refuse?" So you tie a damp rag around your neck, not for show, just to hold your head on. You rinse your face in a pail of water that's probably been shared with 3 horses. You trudge forward. First stop, Lady Clarabelle's chamber. She's requested extra discretion today. You nod, say nothing, and empty a pot that smells like regret and rose jam. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval medicine often prescribed purging and bloodletting for even minor ailments. Ironically, those prescribed methods frequently caused worse illness or death. You, on the other hand, just want soup and a nap. Your fever creeps in slowly, like smoke under a door. The torchlight blurs. Every pot begins to look the same. You live Bertha and Percy like old friends who've betrayed you. In the hallway, a passing noble pats you on the shoulder and says, "Steady hands, my boy." You nearly tip the pot onto his shoes. Fringe tidbit. In the 15th century, one noble family hired a dedicated pot emptier per child. Their logic? Each heir deserves a fresh start. You try not to think about that as you pass the nursery. Your vision swims slightly. You grip the yoke tighter. You dump pot after pot with robotic precision. Somewhere near the chapel corridor, you sneeze so violently you alarm a passing bishop. "Bless you," he mutters, crossing himself. "Thanks," you rasp. Then, a familiar voice. "You don't look right." The laundry girl. She's carrying a basket. She sets it down and steps closer. "You're pale." "Fashion choice." You joke, though it comes out as more of a wheeze. "Sit." You don't argue. She digs in her apron, pulls out a folded cloth, and hands it to you. It's cool, scented faintly with vinegar and mint. "Forehead," she says. You comply. "I can finish the hallway," she offers. You stare at her. "You know I can't let you do that." "Why not?" "Because then you'd know exactly what's in the Duke's diet." She wrinkles her nose. Fair. She doesn't press further. Just sits beside you for a minute. No words. Just the sound of distant clanging and the subtle perfume of laundry starch. You rise again. Unsteady, but still moving. The castle spins slightly as you finish your final round. The pots are heavier than usual. Or maybe your arms are just rebelling. Maybe both. In the waste yard, you tip Percy with exaggerated care. Bertha nearly slips from your grip. You curse under your breath. The trench accepts its bounty with a gurgling sigh. You sit on the nearest crate and let the world tilt. Historians still argue whether servants had any health care at all. Some were treated with leeches, poultices, or foul-smelling concoctions. Others were simply told to walk it off. You've tried all of the above. Walking seems to work best, mostly because it keeps you from freezing to death. The cook appears, as if summoned by misery. He hands you a bowl. You look half dead. "Only on the left side. Eat or drop." "I don't care which." The soup is hot, thick, slightly peppery. You eat, and something inside you flickers back to life. A memory of a childhood cough soothed by broth, of a mother's hand on your brow, of warmth in the cold. You finish. You thank him. He grumbles, something that might be kindness. And then you limp back to your alcove. No fanfare, no parade, just you, the wall, and your cot. You collapse onto it. You stare at the ceiling. You whisper to no one, "Not today, Plague. Try again tomorrow." The next morning, you wake up alive. Surprised, frankly. Your head feels like someone stored pickled onions in your skull overnight. Your limbs have been replaced with wet driftwood, but your fever's broken. Your nose is mostly behaving, and your sense of smell, tragically, has returned. You sit up. Bertha and Percy greet you with silent judgment. "You missed me, didn't you?" you mutter. Percy tilts. Bertha stays stoic. The laundry girl's cloth is still by your cot, dry now, faintly mint-scented. You fold it carefully and tuck it into your belt. Not for sentimental reasons, of course, purely utilitarian. Definitely. You rise slower today. You're not late, but you're not early either, and nobody waits for you. By the time you reach the Queen Mother's chamber, her maid is already peering down the corridor like she's expecting a parade. You're behind, she says. You're awake, you reply, which is not the smoothest comeback, but it earns you a frown, which is its own reward. You retrieve the pot, light mercifully, and move on. Your arms still ache, but your body, battered though it may be, knows the dance. Step here, duck that beam, shift left near the tapestry, with the bird that looks weirdly judgmental. You know this place like the back of your increasingly calloused hand. And today is special, because today is cleaning day. Not cleaning the pots. That's every day. No, this is the day the entire privy trench gets cleared. Once a season, the castle's great waste trench, where all pots are poured, all refuse disappears, is emptied. And by emptied, we mean shoveled, scooped, and sloshed by a crew of the unluckiest humans ever assembled. Guess who's crew captain? Mainstream historical fact. Medieval castles relied on cesspits or garderobes, which required regular cleaning. Often, entire teams were paid to shovel human waste, known as gong farmers. It was dangerous, disgusting, and oddly well paid. You get all the disgust, none of the pay. You assemble your team, 3 stable lads, 1 kitchen scullion, an old Tib, who is legally too old for this, but refuses to miss it because it clears the sin. You don your muck apron. You head to the trench. It greets you with a squelch and a smell that suggests cabbage, failure, and existential despair. The tools are ready. Rakes, buckets, prayer. You start shoveling. Every motion is a battle. Every slop echoes. One of the stable boys retches. Tib hums a hymn. You lose a boot and retrieve it with a stick. It's never the same. Halfway through, a small crowd gathers, nobles mostly, to watch. As if this is theater. You bow sarcastically. They blink. A child throws a plum at you. You catch it, eat it, maintain eye contact. Fringe tidbit. During one royal inspection, the queen reportedly fainted from the trench stench. Her ladies-in-waiting blamed a sudden wind. You suspect it was the eels. Yes, there were eels. No, you don't want to talk about it. You finish the trench. You rinse your boots, change aprons, wash your hands 3 times, and still feel haunted. Then the steward finds you. There's talk, he says. Always is. About your work. The queen's noticed. You brace for something terrible. She says, you're efficient and unsettlingly quiet. You blink. That's a compliment, he adds, and walks off before you can ruin the moment with gratitude. You stand there for a while, Bertha under one arm, Percy hanging from your yoke like a loyal sidekick. You are unsettlingly quiet because your job is loud enough on its own, and yet you've become part of the rhythm, the hidden machinery, the quiet presence that keeps the whole show from descending into filth. You make your way to the far corner of the courtyard. There's a bench there. No one uses it. It smells faintly of thyme and ash. You sit. You take out the laundry cloth. You unfold it. You breathe. It smells like someone remembered you exist. You rest your head against the stone wall and whisper, so softly only the moss hears it, still here. Historians still argue whether chamber pot workers found pride in their work. But you don't need a historian to tell you, pride isn't about what you carry. It's about how you carry it. And you? You carry the castle, 1 pot at a time. The castle wakes again. So do you. Same boots, same yoke, same aches threaded through your joints like yesterday's gossip. But today feels different, lighter somehow. You've survived illness, nobles, trench day, and a surprise plum. You've learned that chamber pot work is not just about filth, it's about endurance, about showing up, about becoming so dependable that even the walls start to rely on you. You begin your route as always. But now people nod, just barely. A page boy offers you a biscuit without making a face. A steward lets you pass without muttering about improper storage. Even the Duchess of Summerdale, whose opinion of you ranks slightly below her footstool, utters a single syllable of recognition. Humph. Progress. You collect your first pot from the Queen Mother's room. It's lighter than usual. She must have skipped supper, or embraced fasting, or finally taken the court physician's advice to try less gravy, more broth. Either way, you whisper your usual greeting to the pot, "Good morning, Your Majesty's digestives," and tuck it under your arm with reverence. You think back over the week. It's a blur of smells, sounds, and near catastrophes. You think of the glitter pot, of dog mishaps, of trench duty, of fever and flutes, of kindness in the form of soup, of linen pressed into your hand when you were too tired to speak. You deliver the pot, pause to scrub your hands in the now rare lemon water, and find yourself staring at your own reflection in the brass basin. You don't look like a hero. You look like someone who's scrubbed grout with a toothbrush and wrestled a goose for corridor space. But you're here, still. Mainstream historical fact. In some courts, senior potmen were eventually given uniforms, badges, even titles. Groom of the stool, being the most infamous. Supposedly dignified. Absolutely ridiculous. You've never needed a title. You've had Percy. You visit the kitchen one last time before sunset. The cook gives you a look, then, wordlessly, hands over a small wrapped parcel. Bread and something sweet. "I had extra," he mutters. "You always have extra. You're extra." It's the closest thing to affection you'll ever get from him. You nod, tuck the parcel into your tunic, and wander out to the herb courtyard. The laundry girl is there, hanging cloths. She doesn't look at you, just says, "The Queen asked for your name." You stop. "She said the new boy is reliable, quiet, smells tolerable." You blink. "She'll probably forget it by supper," she adds. You smile. Still counts. She shrugs, but her smile betrays her. Fringe tidbit. Some nobles had their favorite servants buried with small tokens. Cloth scraps, tools, even miniature chamber pots. It was meant to symbolize service beyond death. You don't plan on dying anytime soon. But if you do, you'll haunt this place with Bertha and Percy as your ghostly sidekicks. The castle begins to dim, torches lit, footsteps slow, laughter echoes from the great hall. Music starts. Soft lute, low drums, something vaguely in tune. You hear someone drop a goblet. Standard. And you sit by the garden wall, crust in hand, moon overhead. You close your eyes. You made it. You didn't plan to become this essential. You just showed up. Again and again. Through slop and sickness. Through forgotten names and thankless hours. Through every unglamorous, unsung, quietly noble moment. You are the potman. The castle doesn't know your full name, but it runs because of you. And tonight, you rest. The castle fades behind you, now. Slowly, gently, like mist rolling off a lake at dawn. You step away from the stone walls, the echoing halls, the flickering torches that cast dancing shadows on soot-stained floors. The yoke slides from your shoulders with a soft clatter, and the weight you didn't even realize you still carried begins to lift. The night air is cool, not biting, just enough to tingle your skin in that sleepy, welcome way. You breathe it in, deep, slow. No trench fumes, no stew remnants, just damp moss and distant lavender. Somewhere a lone owl calls. Somewhere else a pot remains unemptied. But not by you. Not tonight. You ease down onto a patch of grass that smells faintly of thyme and stare at the stars. They look less like distant balls of fire and more like old friends keeping quiet watch. You stretch out your legs. Let your arms fall limp at your sides. No more lists. No more rags. No more questions about whether that puddle is soup or something else. Just the hush. Just your breath. Just the stillness. Tomorrow will come. It always does. With its spills and groans and potman echoes down the corridor. But for now, you've done enough. You are enough. Let the world turn without you, just for a while. Sleep, friend. Sleep deep.